I have like an experimental presentation I will deliver today. Rather, it will be a talk, not presentation, about a topic that on the surface lies on the surface of it, but on the other hand is a very difficult and sophisticated matter, especially because of the special features in the Russian culture and the Russian word Pravda, truth, which is the topic of my presentation. I tried to look at it because of many of the global dispute we have about post-truth, and about what is going on, about trust for confidence in the information people read. So, seeking to go somewhat further than we usually do, as it happens on the pages of op-eds in the newspapers, in daily newspapers, I tried to make a point of it, and that is why
самому слову «правда», и я попытаюсь сделать так. Я вначале...
And that's why I looked at the word Pravda, truth, which is not quite Pravda. I'll try to draw the picture which is furthest away from the truth and start with semantic and linguistic analysis of the word. And later on, I'll go back down to earth, and then we'll look at this problem of trust and confidence in information. As to the word Pravda, well, I owe it all to the philologist Konstantin Sigov, who is the author of an article about the word Pravda in the dictionary of things that cannot be translated, non-translatable words. Originally, it was a French project. It exists in French. It was published in Ukrainian. It is not available in Russian, but this article about the word Pravda is there. And as well, I'm thankful to Sasha Shmelyov for his drawing attention to the book by his father, philologist Alexei Shmelyov, about the language picture of the Russians. And this is where they have there's a section on the word Istina and Pravda, two words. So let's go to the word Pravda. So in our everyday usage of this word, we can see something that is typical of this word. We want to know the truth. We want to tell the truth. We can urge people to tell the truth. As a rule, rather, again, in Russian, there is this difference between truth and verity, rather. Istina is like more what the English speakers think is truth. We don't. So there is half-truth, which is not really veritable. There is no such thing as non-veritable thing. We can say everyone has its own pravda, but hardly you can say people have their own truism or veritable. Every country, every culture has its own pravda. Again, truth. In English, it's all rather truth, but verity. Verity, okay? The Slavic word pravda almost fully corresponds to the Greek word dikaiosune, which means justice, fairness, and to the Latin word justus, justitia. So in original usage, that was basically very much the same, this word pravda. This word has to do with which is right. In Russian, it's pravda, pravilno. They have the same root. So this word it has its origin from the word pravi, straight and right. So etymologically, it is linked, it is rooted with many roots in other languages where it originates there, which also in other languages mean correct, right, and straight. Pravi. In other Slavic languages, as a rule, the meaning also is linked to the notion of justice, fairness, as well as with diverse aspects of finding out justice, when you go to court to find justice. In Serbian language, pravda means process, court hearing and process. And it is a law, a case, a legal case and rule, legal rule, righteousness sort of. I think that is very important to remember that originally, etymologically, the word more rather has to do with having the right to the law. Something that we'll practically not discuss, I'll just mention it in passing, that here with the an abrupt divergence of semantics with the word istina, which is verity. Istina or verities exist in natural science. Like in textbooks, you practically will never hear the word truth, pravda. You will find it as istina. So mathematics, you can have something that will not be truth, pravda. It will be just corresponding to verity, meaning that it will be just, it will be right. To confirm what we have already discussed about the meaning of this as the verity, again, truth in English, you can remember the gospel quotation when there is this parable when Jesus goes to be baptized and John the Baptist tells him, "Why are you coming to me? I'm not worthy to baptize you. You were supposed to." Whereas Jesus tells him that, "No, come, please do, because in point of fact we must fulfill every truth," as it sounds in Russian. And it is incumbent upon us to indica iusune and justitio in Greek and in Latin. So we should do what is fair, what is right, what is incumbent upon us to do. So, pravda, it's something that is right, the right way to do, the right way to go. So, a quote from the works by the Russian philosopher Vladimir Solovyov. In every language, moral and ethical notions are expressed in the words that are derivatives from the same root. That is the case in Greek, that is the case in Latin, that is the case in Russian, and in German, Gerechtigkeit. English is right and righteousness. Solovyov identifies truth as due or proper relation or attitude towards everything. Semyon Frank, a student of Vladimir Solovyov's, also Russian philosopher. Yes, Elena reminds me quite to the point. This is a quote from the book by Semyon Frank, Russian Mindset. In the Russian language, there is a very typical word which plays an extremely important role in the Russian thought. From popular thought to the creative genius, it's a word that cannot be translated in other languages, pravda, which means two things. First, verity and moral and natural right. Very much like in German, there's a word richtig, which means something that in theory and in practice is something that corresponds to what it should be. Another quote, I apologize for quoting so much, it is that it turns out people thought about it in the past too. And when I found it, I was so happy about this. Nikolai Mikhailovsky. We had the writer, literature studies. He belonged to what is known as a group of Narodnik, who sought to enlighten the Russian people. Every time the word pravda comes to my mind, I can't but admire it, its moral and internal beauty. I suppose it doesn't exist in other language, maybe in Russian only. Verity and justice are known as just two notions, merge in one word. Indeed, this is something special of our culture, of our language, which in this way brings together in one word these sophisticated, and I'd put it rather, how shall I put it? Things that do not merge, they do not coincide. We shall go back in a while to the effects of this cultural special feature As we recall before that, the usage of the word Pravda in older days and how it correlates with our ideas about the right and about law. Everybody remembers the name of the oldest legal code in Pravda Ruskaya, like the Russian Truth or Russian Code, which is linked to the name of Monomach. The interpreter begs to differ. It was Yaritslev. And there it surely means law. Russian Truth, as it was known, Pravda Ruskaya, is a document, authentic document, that enumerates things that need to be done, like in some situations, how people should behave when the conflicts arise, what fines should be paid for what felonies. In the 18th century, Theophane Prokopovich, commissioned by Peter the Great, writes a treatise named Pravda Voli Monarchii, truth or pravda or law of the monarch's will, which stipulates on the absolute power. It was a famous document by Pavel Pestel, again Russian Truth, Russian Pravda. Again, that was tantamount to the Russian Constitution draft. That was a document which, as the Decembrists thought, at least the Decembrists of the Southern Society, that when the revolution take place, they, based upon that document, will be reconstructing and rebuilding the life in Russia. In the same row, I suppose you can find the newspaper Pravda. The word Pravda, that was the name of the Soviet and Bolshevik newspaper, because what the Bolsheviks meant that they strove for, again, this Pravda, something truthful, and they instinctively probably chose the word Pravda, following the tradition, national cultural tradition, that they establish a certain novel understanding of what is fair, of what is right, as the country should live, along which lines in the point of fact. All this usage of the word Pravda, I suppose it matters a lot to us. Why? Because in Russia, in Russian culture, the more acquires a huge independent meaning of its own and begins to live in a world of its own, but in a very strange and queer way. There's words that originate from the same root, like prava and pravda. Prava means the right and the law, and the other pravda, but they are torn away from each other, separated, and they exist in each in its own right, which seems pretty strange. In some way, Pravda lives in its own very high sort of existence, leads its own existence. It's a very high, rather supreme challenge that the word poses, saying it claims to belong to the highest moral and ethical level. We perfectly understand, remembering our traditional literature, that literature and literary criticism in our culture very often assumed a role of being the social and the public tribune. Great literary figures and figures of Russian literary criticism, it turned out that in life they would turn out to be people who pronounced or gave their verdict, gave their judgment about the reality, and the society tended to accept their viewpoint. Why? Because those were figures of authority. But at that, this highest or supreme court, or judgment rather, this is this supreme truth that, for example, Gogol's books by Gogol, books by Dostoevsky, well, this supreme truth, it's not at all linked to and doesn't coincide with, and why should it, with the what we see like legislature, like what we see like legal rules. No, it's something in its own right, in its own reality. It exists in its own world. In the Russian culture, what is very typical is mistrust for the law enforcement, for the justice, judiciary, at least in the way the Russian state, as well as great confidence in the judgment pronounced by a figure of authority, be it a writer or a literary critic or a journalist. I mean, historically, that has been the case, or rather was the case. In point of fact, in some informal way, because there's nothing that is written down, a literary man, a figure of authority, is empowered to be like a prosecutor or a judge to return his judgment on some phenomena. But we see this judgment law, judgment word of judgment, a word that carries truth, Pravda, because this is sentence over injustice, sentence over the system, and sentence over illegal deeds, which encompasses, amongst other things, the judiciary system. Therefore, the legal system in the Russian Empire and later on in the Soviet Union and in today's Russia, the legal system, it seems like that this Pravda looks at it from above. And it is like a figure of authority that returns judgment on that, to this injustice. It is above the law. It is looking at it from its own height, because the judiciary belongs to the same state machinery, and there is no trust in it. That's why Pravda becomes something extraordinarily important in Russia, something that is absolutely supreme, and that it's very vague. This beauty, the beauty of it all, which was referred to by Simeon Frank, which was referred to by philosopher Mikhailovsky, they're indeed amazing, but on the other hand, there is the flip side of this, when this word combines so many important notions. And what is this verso, or rather underside of this? That this truth is, Pravda, is so huge, so important, but it's so uncertain, so vague. It turns out that this Pravda can be grabbed with all its attributes, with all its multiple meanings that it carries, the supreme meaning, and just make it the Pravda of the state. Just to call the newspaper Pravda, to give it its name, Pravda, and use this like something like a position, like a platform, from which you will be dictating to people how to think about things, how to understand everything, how to understand social life and whatever we see in it, like a podium. And as we know from our own history, and this was many times realized, I don't know, I don't have the final answer to this. I just try to understand it in honest and in earnest. And today I'm coming close to the conclusion that this profound and beautiful notion of Pravda, it is as beautiful as it is horrible and dangerous, but just because that the Russian culture has placed it so high, unattainably high. And to get to understand in great detail what it is made of, this sort of sacred meanings, nobody has the time or opportunity. There is just belief in that this Pravda should be there. There is the high judgment, not the highest verity, mind you, not at all. It's out there, and surely somebody, sometime, someday, later will show us, and those will also blame those who are to blame and punish them, sort of. It's all pretty uncertain and vague and torn away from reality, including the legal reality. And this is an opportunity, and we're moving over closer to our everyday life, where we can see that, in point of fact, it turns out that the state finds it difficult, but it does establish monopoly over Pravda, over truth in Russia, following the same principle or the same lines as they establish monopoly over violence, which by definition, by Max Weber, is a certain most important sign of the, or rather feature of the state. In Russia, it almost always turned out that you need not only monopoly over violence, but you also need monopoly over Pravda. And in its most literal sense of the word, we can see it in modern reality too, in the reality of current events, when many key news and many key pieces of news and many most important conflicts, it turns out that the Russian explanation and somebody else's, say from abroad, international, or for example, or independent within Russia. For example, a plane was downed over Ukraine. It's one story that is recounted in one way beyond Russia and in Russia, despite the fact that in Russia there is a certain number of independent media still. The domineering narrative, the very way this story is presented in Russia, it's radically different from the way it is seen beyond Russia, abroad. So strange as it may seem, despite internet, despite transparency, despite the fact that you can travel across the country and abroad in the very same environment, in the same social environment, you can establish certain guidelines, sort of landmarks for society, some guidelines, which will be different from others. So it turns out that we have our own Pravda, our own many questions which matter for the Russian state, a matter of principle, and it works. Thank goodness. And in this situation, we have some special feature that you cannot just switch it off, switch off the support for one's own version of events. Moscow leadership cannot just abandon or forget. They have no time, or they run out of money to support the television, for example. And it won't work, because then it will all collapse. All these versions have to be supported at every moment. Thus, when you support your own, stand behind your own version of events, whatever that may be, it's just, for example, that there are fascists in Ukraine and that the plane was downed by another plane, maybe Ukrainian or maybe God knows who from land. Nemtsov was killed, God knows by whom, was killed by nobody knows whom. This sort of things, they cannot be switched off. Because if you provide the information and you allow it to circulate freely, your problems will ensue. And at that they're pinpointed to sort of some very few matters which enjoy this pinpointed support, like 99% of information circulates freely, but there are these topics where you can't stop supporting your own version. And this creates this sort of funnel. Every time you have to keep this, support this information wall. And let's get back to post-truth. In brief, what I think about this. It has become so spread recently. It's a huge discussion that they adopt laws, saying the laws adopted in the West, saying that this, for example, social media should be responsible for say, fake news that are being propagated there. I do suppose that the right word to use would be not post-pravda, but post-istina, post-verity. In English, it's still the truth, but in Russian makes this distinction. Because here we see like that there is a violation of the, that it's not true, that it is false in this sense that the word truth, true, is used by natural science. But as we saw, Russian Pravda has nothing to do about the actual correspondent to actual reality. It's rather about justice, about the righteousness, and about the right, about how, what it should be, not about how things stand, but what the way they should be, in the supreme sense. But verity, like truth in the English sense of the word, is just correspondence to facts, as is, not as it should be. So this is where we see this duality. Duality which is well described in Russian, in the relevance and importance of istina, or verity, truth as verity, this, because of this bifurcation, for a huge number of reasons, which unfortunately we have no time to discuss. It goes down to, and when it comes to the four, so what matters most is something like pravda, like truth, something that is individual. This is my truth.
This is my truth. Then the national truth of my people, of my nation, or for that matter, a public statement acquires an independent value, quite irrespective of the fact if it is truthful or if it is relying upon some documentary evidence. Such public statement does not have to be, according to such logic, does not have to be verified, which means that a verified statement or a verified truth is some sort of a natural science statement, which indeed stays in the world of documents, archives, scientific publications, the world of science per se, the world of facts, but and that scientists still have to agree and have agreed what is fact and evidence. This is not being refuted. But this world of fact and truth is one, and the public discourse is something else. Something else that we could call truthfulness, because a politician who comes to talk to the people and saying things which are interesting or pleasant, then it is of course more the truth than verity, pravda and istina, the fine distinction between the two Russian terms. So this we will have our pravda, our say American truth, or our Russian truth, or some other version of the truth, which is in according to that logic again being differentiated from the verity or the scientific verity, the scientific truth, which goes to the background. So this, I think, is something that we are viewing through the prism of the Russian prism, through the Russian culture, and which allows us to register some of the changes in the public space of other countries. And I think that post-truth is more applicable in this sense.